So, good morning, all. A very, very good morning to all of you. I'm very happy to be with you. First of all, first of all, I must congratulate the college which has organized this wonderful lecture, which is Professor Anthony Lecture, Professor E.C. Anthony Memorial Lecture of 2020, being organized by the Government College of Thrissur and being coordinated by the head of the department and Blessed Razina and IT help, Mr. Sebastian. I'm thankful to all of you. I'm thankful to the college for inviting me. Dr. Ambika, I'm thankful to you. And I appreciate your brief, nice introduction. So with this, let's remember Professor Anthony for a while. Professor Anthony, who served in this college for a long time. I hear he was a great professor. He must be a great professor and an outstanding academic person. I feel connected to him specially because he was committed to some causes. He was an activist. I too would define myself as an activist. So there is some link between him and me. And also, he was teaching English. So there is an English teaching fraternity feeling for him. I remember him and I pay my tribute to his great memory, along with his family and you all. This lecture, which has been a very, very important lecture, prestigious lecture, being organized by this college for a long time, maybe for 20 years by now. It has got a list of professors who gave lecture here, like Professor Sachidanand Ramakrishnan, Professor Raj Krishna, Professor Jensi Jain, Dr. Meena Pillai, and my dear friend, Professor P.K. Rajan. He delivered his last lecture, that is his last public lecture, was on this platform on 5th of Jan. And then after maybe within 7 days' time, he was no more. He left us. So we miss him. We remember him. And I feel very, very honored in being on a platform where Professor Rajan and many other great scholars have been present. So with great memories of Professor Rajan. And yes, I would like to add that this is a way of my keeping my promise to Professor P.N. Prakash, my friend, who had invited me to deliver this lecture in the year 2012. And it so happened that I had traveled up to Trivandrum. I attended a meeting there, and then I was supposed to travel to Thrissur and deliver this lecture. And I could not make it because I received a sad news that my father was no more. So I had to travel back. I dropped the lecture. I felt very sorry. And now, after so many years, after 8 years, here is an opportunity to keep my promise, which was given to this college and to my dear friend, P.N. Prakash. And I'm not able to come to you physically because of the pandemic. And even before the pandemic, I have been listening to talks like, you see, 21st century is the century which will be a flat world, which will create a flat world. And when I read a book called The World is Flat, A Brief History of 21st Century, I was rather wondering what it meant. But by the time we are in 2020 or 2019, we realize what it means. And now, digital platform is the only platform available to us to reach one another, to share our experiences, and to have lectures like this. So I honor the demand of the time, which is talking to you from the digital platform, which has started defining academics and students in a very different manner. Earlier, there were ways of defining, but now you see the digital media is defining us. And we are being called, you see, digital natives or digital immigrants or digital illiterate or literate. And in this world, you see, these are some of the books which talk about the reality. That's not my subject, but I'm just mentioning this, that because of this, we are meeting through this medium. And we, the senior academics, we have started, you see, with the digital media. The younger people, of course, would qualify perhaps as digital natives because they are very much into it. But senior people like me, who would not like to be called digital exiles or digital illiterate, some of us are digital orphans, finding our way in this digital world. And some, like me, perhaps have started calling themselves digital immigrants. So we are digital immigrants who are exploring this new world of digital reality, digital platform. And because of pandemic, see, many things are happening. And one thing which has happened to women is that, you see, their protection has become a problem all over the world. And UN is concerned, and they have started taking action to protect women. And they call this reality of COVID-19 concerning women as shadow pandemic. So we are in the age of shadow pandemic. We are in the age of digital world. And I address you not in person, but through this platform because of this reality. This takes me to my topic. The topic is being and doing gender. Being and doing gender as feminist academics. Why did I choose this topic? First of all, let me give credit of this title, Being and Doing Gender, to Madras University, which held a national seminar a few years back, which was called Being and Doing Gender. And I had delivered a keynote address there. So from there, this title comes, and I acknowledge their credit, their contribution. Now, why this topic? Because for women, for us, for the underprivileged minorities also, you see, for us, personal is political. I'm talking about the feminist academics. And so we must talk about whatever happened to us. So it's not really highlighting the personal experience, perhaps, but it is going by a kind of conviction that whatever a minority person experiences, she must talk it out. And with reference to feminists, well, women must talk out because ultimately personal is political. Next topic, next is because here one stands for many. It's a collective voice. It is the voice of experience. So when in this context, a woman is talking like me, a woman talking, and there have been many women academics who have talked. They have talked not to boast or not to tell you how they suffered or how they achieved, but rather to share their experiences because one stands for many. So it is many people's experience, and because women's untold stories need to be told. So women have not told their stories. And I'm going to quote a very important feminist writer called Caroline Hilbrun. And the quotation is that the power consists to a large extent in deciding which stories should be told. And women need to dare to be unpopular and tell the stories with their own script. Women must script their own stories. And there's risk of being unpopular. And many women would not like to be unpopular, but few would dare to do that, as did Caroline Hilbrun, as did many others, and as I'm doing today. Being and doing gender as feminist academics, there are 4 components of the title. Being and doing gender, 2 titles, 2 words, and then as feminist and as academics. So there are 4 components of this title. Out of 4 components, you see, usually
Ranjana,
when yes,
ma'am,
can you hear me?
sorry to interrupt, ma'am. But ma'am, I think the PPT is not visible. Can you just start sharing
What
PPT?
happened? Okay. Shall I connect it again?
Yes, ma'am. I think you
Why
can
didn't
connect.
you tell me earlier? Okay, I'm disconnecting. Okay, I'll connect it again. Sorry. No. Okay, can you please connect it? Hello? Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Should I, ma'am?
Rajina,
Should I? Yes,
Rajina,
ma'am.
yeah, you started because
Okay.
I'm not getting it connected. Okay?
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
Yeah. Hello? Rajina, are you doing it?
One second, ma'am. I'm just connecting it. One second.
Yeah, yeah, take time.
Like presentation, madam.
Ranjana ma'am,
Yeah.
Aman, can I ask Sebastian to make the presentation?
All right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You have a copy, right? You can do it.
Then I'll ask Sebastian to help us.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, fine.
Thank you, ma'am. And thank you.
Sebastian.
Okay.
Ranjana ma'am, now it's visible.
Yes, yes. Can you go to slide number 5? Okay, fine. Fine. All right. Okay. So these four, sorry for the disturbance, the technical hitch that we had. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello?
You're audible.
Okay,
You're
fine.
audible.
All right. So now Sebastian will be changing the slides. I'll be requesting him to change the slides, or I
Yes,
can do it myself.
I will be changing it.
All right, fine. So we have been talking about, you see, the 4 components of this topic. And mostly when we talk about women, you see, most of the times that you see, we end up saying that women don't have choices. And my understanding is that out of these 4, 3 are women's own choice. The academic women, for them to be an academic woman, to be a feminist, and after being a feminist, to do that, and that is being feminist, doing feminism, doing activism, doing academics, all this is their choice. Only being born as a woman is something which is not in her hand. So I would say that whatever I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about some academic women who did gender, and all of them, in my understanding, are the people who made a choice, a conscious choice of doing gender, of becoming feminist because of their experiences. So that's, hello, can you hear me? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Hello. Sebastian, next slide, please. Yeah. And now after this much of background, I would like to talk about some of the feminist academics who devoted their lives to doing gender. This does not mean that men did not do gender. Men also did do a lot of gender, but we are just going to focus on women, academic women who did gender. And the one who has been very, very important in my understanding, and one who has really inspired me all my life, is the earlier generation professor of English at Columbia University. Her name was Caroline Hilbrun. And this remarkable, outstanding feminist academic, she was a great achiever. On Columbia University, she was the first woman to receive her tenure in the English department. She became the chair of women's studies as well, and she was the dean as well. And she was a prolific feminist author and an activist herself. And she was a star professor of Columbia University who claimed that she had been born as a feminist and had never wavered from that position. So this wonderful academic feminist person, Caroline Hilbrun, how was she treated by the university? Was she respected? Usually with this kind of achievement, we would expect that she would be respected. But what kind of experience she had? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes. Caroline Hilbrun, she did not get to the New York Times magazine's cover page when she did a great feminist work, research work, and she contributed richly. But she hit the headlines of New York Times in 1992 when she did something. And this something was that she resigned from her position. This resignation was in protest of something that had happened to her. And the Columbia University was charged against, it was charged for discriminating against women. So she was the one who had courage to say something about her university. And the dean of the faculty, he accused her. He said that she was rather, saying something which was rubbish. It was not true. And she retorted, saying that ironically, my name in the catalog gave Columbia a reputation for encouraging feminist studies in modernism. Nothing could be further from the truth. I was one of the 2 star professors of the department, along with Edward Said. And then, why was she treated like that? A star professor who was treated like that, who had resigned from her position. Why? Because whenever she spoke on women's issues, she was always made to feel unwelcome in the department as well as in the university. And she was kept out of all the committees and was ridiculed and was ignored. And next slide, please. And this remarkable, outstanding feminist woman, all her life, she had struggled, she had fought for women's rights. And finally, the department and the university created such a situation wherein she had to resign. Only because, she was not really listening, or she was not behaving as per the expectations of the male members of that university. I missed out a point where she talks about, wait a minute, no. Earlier slide, please. Can you go to the earlier slide, please? Hello.
Yes, madam. Yes, madam.
Yeah, can you go to the earlier slide, please?
Previous one.
Yeah, previous one. Yes. Caroline Hilbrun, who stood for women's rights, who did a lot of work for Women's Studies Department of Columbia University. She was treated very badly, nastily by the university. And every time there was something, whenever there was a proposal for any project, or whenever there was an appointment to be made, the university male professors, they had realized that this woman was so very powerful that her power was threatening to them. And they created a kind of gang that started calling themselves a tree house gang. And this tree house gang on the campus would see to it that this senior professor, what happened? Hello?
Yes, madam. 1 minute.
Sebastian?
Yes, 1 minute.
Okay. All right, you do it. I'll just continue. So this professor was made to realize that she could not function in this kind of situation wherein all the men were against her on the campus. They were scared of her, and it was not that she was unequal to them. Rather, she was more equal. She was more capable, and her capacity was rather something which was threatening them. And they had created a treehouse gang. And this treehouse gang on the university campus of Columbia was the gang which was doing all the uh, wrong things against this great professor. And there was some appointment to be made in the Department of Women's Studies. And the most deserving woman professor, woman candidate was not taken. And the male on the EC, men on the EC, all of them, they just wanted to decide everything by voting. Not only she, but she says that no woman really was respected on the campus. All her experiences of being on the campus and, you see, finally leaving the campus, almost disappointed and frustrated, she narrates all her experience in a wonderful long essay which was published by her after she resigned in a critical theory journal. And the essay was called The End of a Long Marriage. See, it was a personal, very personal title. So the metaphor of marriage was something very important because, you see, she was, for women, marriage is very important. But for her, it was very, very important because she was a woman who had 47 years of marriage. She was married happily. And she says that being on campus was like having a romance with education. And you see, she was in love with her professor. She was in love with teaching. And she loved the university. She loved teaching. She loved whatsoever which was associated with the university. And then gradually, one after one, she has experiences and she realizes this is a wrong place to be in. By that time, she is already a professor. And now she is just finding out that this is a university which has never cared for her star women professors. Kate Millett had moved out of this university. Margaret Mead, who was a great sociologist, she was not really respected well, and she was not given her professorship and her tenure in time. She was ignored. And finally, you see, Margaret Mead, who was a star professor, when the professorship was offered to him, she just rejected it and said, it's too late, I can't take it. And I have been honored everywhere but at Columbia. So Columbia was a kind of a place where women professors were not respected. I was the only declared feminist who stayed back, but I was not a declared feminist till I got my tenure. So, well, this senior professor, she realized that Columbia University was a university in which men ruled. And after realizing this, she writes in this essay that she decided to quit the university. She resigned. And she writes that in life, as in fiction, women who speak out usually end up punished or dead. I'm lucky to escape with my pension and a year of leave. She finally left the university, and it was almost like an elegy of the death of that beautiful romantic relationship between a senior professor and the university that she wrote this essay, End of a Long Marriage. This essay has played a very important part in my personal life. That is, I have gone by, you see, she has inspired me, and I remain indebted to her. And now turning to, yes, next slide, please. Hello. Next slide, please. Yes. The first generation woman, that is Caroline Hilbrun, she was disillusioned, and she was disillusioned and she left the university. She quit the university. And the story goes on. How many women academics have suffered this kind of discrimination? Well, there are many. The tales of experience of feminist academics in India, but before that, feminist academics abroad. I have known quite a few of them personally, and they have shared their experiences with me, like a professor who was working in York University, Susan Galligan, a very senior professor, who told me that she had to fight for equal rights. And she led a strike of women, university women, for 17 days in 1997. When I was there on the campus, I was expected to teach, but I could not teach because women of the campus were on strike. And there are many others, like Helen Booth of Cargill University, who struggled and who really found it difficult to survive. And Indian women as well, first generation women like Meera Desai, women academics like Meera Kosambi, like Pushpa Bhave, they have all shared their experiences. But I would like to talk about my generation women. I just want to talk to you about 3 women very quickly, and then I move to myself. Well, I used to know a professor of dance in a very outstanding University of Gujarat. And this professor of dance was a Fulbright scholar. And she was in a department which was being ruled by the traditional gurus. And these gurus did not have degrees. These gurus were trained in the Guru Parampara. And this feminist professor lady, she was a Fulbright scholar with a PhD and published work. And she was always looked down upon in her own department. She was discriminated, and she fought for her and for many women's rights in the performing arts. Not only that, but in the year 2005, she had to put up a dharna, a hunger strike, to get justice for the performing arts women professors. And she was very, very disappointed because the university could not take much of stand. The male gurus were so very powerful, and they were being supported by the dean of the faculty, who was in the mainstream, that is, he had his degree and all that. But she had to wait until the gurus retired, and then she got her dues. Another senior professor that I knew was a professor in Maharashtra, one of the universities in Maharashtra. And this woman, she was the chair of Women's Development Cell. I want to talk about her because, you see, I'm going to compare my experiences with her. So this Women's Development chairperson, senior person, she had to really struggle hard to see that the university women got their rights. She was appointed under the Supreme Court order, under the order of the MHRD and the UGC. She was just representing all these institutions, but she was targeted all through her life as long as she was in charge of that Women's Development Cell. A happy exception that I have come across is a senior activist professor woman, head of the department, in a women's university in Bombay. And she was a very happy exception because, you see, she told me that the university's motto was women's empowerment. The university was founded by Acharya Karve to empower women. So she did not have to take she did not have to struggle the way all the other women, academic women all over the world struggled. And now finally, I'm coming to my experiences. I think I should take 15 minutes. Okay, next, please. Next slide, please. Okay, coming events cast their shadows before. Prior to my interview for Gujarat University position, Times of India reviewed my then recent book and called me a feminist activist. And a chain of actions and reactions started. Please, next slide. Next slide, please. Yes. So I was already, I was introduced by the newspapers, Gujarati as well as English, as a feminist prior to my appointment. And it was rather, I thought I was very unlucky that my book was reviewed just before some 2-3 months of my interview. And in the interview, I did very well. There were 40 candidates. I was shortlisted. And in the discussion, I came to know about all this later. Somebody told me. And in the committee meeting, that is experts meeting, when they discussed, I was number 1 in priority, but the head of the Department of English, he was against my appointment. Why? He gave certain reasons. Now, you see, personal reasons for professional appointment. Look at this, the discrimination at the very entry point. And his argument was not she, because her husband is in transferable job. My husband was a banker, so his job was transferable. So number 1 objection, my husband was transferable, as if my husband's job will decide my fate. Next, not she, because she's a feminist. The newspapers had called me feminist. So this was quoted by a senior professor head against my appointment, that she is a feminist, so don't take her. And finally, not she, the department has already got 3 women. So out of 7 in those days, the department has 7 members. And you see, out of 7, 3 were women. And he didn't want to take me because, so these were the reasons for my not being taken. So this kind of discrimination was happening in the university offices, in the university interviews. Next, please. Yes. Not only that, all right, my vice chancellor was a strong person and he said out of 40, when she is number 1, we should take her. So, well, I got my appointed, all right, and I entered the university. But immediately after entering the university, I was at the intersection of academics, activism, and art. You see, I stood there and there were multiple stresses in my personal life. And I would talk about those multiple stresses. That is, one of my professors who liked me a lot. He invited me for tea. And then he just told me, I thought he was celebrating my appointment. And he said, no, Ranjana, I'm not celebrating your appointment. I'm expressing my concern for you because, my dear, there were objections against your appointment. And one of them was that you are a feminist because the papers called so. And you also say that you're a feminist. So my advice is that you stop calling yourself feminist. And then he says, a feminist is somebody who is a quarrelsome person, who is not very polite, who may be an outgoing person. And so you are a sweet girl. You should not do all this. So leave. Stop calling yourself feminist because I'm concerned about your future. And this traditional university would not really be happy if you call yourself feminist, and you won't go high in your career. So stop calling yourself feminist. And I was so sorry I had to tell him that, look, sir, if I'm a good person, if you like me, despite the fact that I'm a feminist, well, this is what the feminists are. And if you imagine that feminists are outgoing people, then let me tell you that the feminists who have come all the way, they would know how to use their wisdom and what decisions they should take. So I decided to continue as whatever I was. And then my father, you see, after reading the review of the newspaper, he just came to see me, and he was an academic himself, a great professor and a Rashtrapati Award winner, who tells me that, Ranjana, you see, well, I'm not, you see, it's all right. If a donkey worked very hard, she would be able to write a book and the reviews will appear. And well, there's no need for you to be very, very happy about that because a donkey cannot sing. And I remember his words. He says, you have thrown a jewel in the dust. That is your music. And you're going after pieces of mirror. Why do you do that? You see, you should rather do your music seriously and take your academics as a job. That also was very difficult for me. And finally, the third was AIR, All India Radio director, who would send me, in those days, they would send some cheej, classical cheej, which would be sung by the artist. And he sent me a bunch of compositions saying, you sing this. And I saw the lyrics and I just reacted that I cannot sing them because these are very difficult for me to sing with my conviction. And he said, what's wrong? For ages, these are being sung. And I said, look at the lyric. It says, Saiya Julma Kare. That is my lover. He treats me, and you say, how can I go to fetch water and all this? I can't sing this. And he was annoyed. He told me that, kindly see to it that you don't mix up your feminism and activism with art, fine arts, and music. I stood at the intersection and I realized that I had to decide. I was stressed out. And these multiple stresses, they resulted into a personal loss. And that personal loss was my voice. I lost my voice. And the doctor, the ENT specialist, he suggested that I just remained home and I remained silent anyway, I was silent. I could not speak. So I remained home and I took treatment. And after a month's time, I gained my voice. God sent warning. And then God sent time to decide the priorities. A month of warning and priorities, deciding priorities. And finally, after a month, I made up my mind. I returned to the GU campus with voice, with my voice, individual voice. And I had by then decided that if I have to choose, I will choose that I voice the marginals. I choose to voice women and women's problems. And with this decision, I stepped into the university campus again. And now this being called a feminist has bothered me all my life. That is, in those days, in 90s, this happened. And then in 2012, no, not 12, 2018, there was a registrar of a university talking to me in a public place in presence of some senior academic men. And he tells me everything else is fine, you're writing so well, but why do you want to call yourself a feminist? And I was stunned. You see, I just didn't know. I was shocked. And I told him after a while that, sir, you stop calling yourself a Gandhian. And then I will stop calling myself a feminist. He didn't like that. And now that gentleman has become the vice chancellor of Gandhi University. So look at the way these things are happening to well-placed women. Another example that I had was while I was WDC chair, Women's Development Chair, I had to go to the villages, to the colleges in villages. And one of the Panchayat Pramukh, after listening to me, he called me for tea and then he says in Gujarati that, madam, you can't be a feminist, you can't be a Narivadi because you see, you don't behave like a Narivadi. Narivadis are quarrelsome women. They are no good. They smoke, they drink. You don't. See, what could I tell him? He was an uneducated man. My point is that whatever was happening in 1990s with me, that is objection against my being called feminist, kept on happening in 2007 and 2012 and then 2018. So I had to raise my voice. There was no way that I could stop raising my voice. Next, please. Next slide. Yeah, we have missed one slide, but that's okay. I entered very rough seas. Once I decided that I was going to voice myself and women at large, well, I knew that it was a very tough thing and I'll be in the stormy seas. The earlier years were peaceful because I was doing interdisciplinary gender studies. So whatever I talked, whatever events I held, well, they were limited to academic circles, but then too, you see, men got very upset because Dalit studies, women's studies, African literature were being introduced by me because I was a young member of board of studies and I had local support while my head was an outsider, so he did not have local support. And these introducing all these things made me very unpopular in the department because department people didn't like it. The head didn't like it. And the events that I held, and that these were all interdisciplinary studies. By and by, when I took over the department, I held many interdisciplinary events. And you see the department, and these were the events which really created an awareness on campus regarding interdisciplinary studies. And the department became very well known for gender studies and for our minority concerns and our activism on campus because the others followed me. So we were an activist department. Next, please. Next, please. Yes, next, please. Next, please. Yes. All right. So you see, I got my professorship. There was struggle, but I got my professorship. I settled myself well in the university. I established Remy Canadian Center of Canada, and well, I did well as an academic. And during all these years, I really talked about women's rights. The events we held were the events about, you see, marginal rights and marginal activism. So finally, when the UGC and the Supreme Court of India sent a circular and made it mandatory for the universities to have women's development cells to protect women's rights and protect them from sexual harassment, the university invited me to head to chair the university's Women's Development Cell, which we will call WDC. This WDC was being constituted under Supreme Court's orders. And I was an invited chairperson, and I was asked to found a cell and create the guidelines and create the rules and regulations. And we did it very well, very efficiently with the help of the legislative officers of Gandhinagar, the capital of Gujarat. We did all this, but what was the experience? The initial experience was that people really cooperated. And I realized that women on campus, off campus, we have some 300 colleges affiliated to the university. And we went to all of them. There were workshops. Women were awakened to their rights, and women meant anybody, any woman working for or associated with a college or a university. So there were girls, there were women, there were some few lakh women who were, and we had regular workshops, we had regular seminars, and we had contact programs going to the colleges and talking. And over 1 year's time, I found that women had realized that, until now, they were almost like, paralyzed. They did not care. They were ignorant. And now, whenever I quoted these lines, they agreed with me. That is Florence Nightingale's line, give back to us our pain of awareness, which is better than the paralysis of ignorance. They were ignorant. Though they were teachers, though they were university women, they were ignorant about their rights. And they lived a paralytic life, they felt. And now with Women's Development Cell, they awakened to their pain. So it was painful. The first phase was a painful phase. And of course, a phase which made them aware. And we established some 256 branches of Women's Development Cell all across Gujarat. And the gender awareness among the lakhs of university women, and the difference that it made was great. Women were made aware of their rights. And the result was that, next please. Awareness always brings realization that they were being exploited, that they were not being given their rights. And because of that, there were cases against, whoever did a wrong thing. And my philosophy, my feminist philosophy is very different. That, as a feminist, I don't believe that men are my enemy. No. As a feminist, I believe that it's very essential for me as a senior woman to promote younger women's education, younger women's rights, rather than grabbing somebody else's right, or rather than depriving somebody else of his right. But then too, finally, it boils down to gender conflict. And the gender conflict started happening on campus, off campus, in the colleges. There were many cases coming against men who did wrong things. And women were talking about it, and we started taking initiative against whatever. And we had our rules and regulations to go by. And so finally the result was that whatever happened, I was the one who was responsible for women's awakening, for women's complaints, for whatever, for the courage that they had. For everything, I was held responsible. So, or WDC was looked upon as an enemy of university men, university principals, university men, university male students, university male lecturers. Everybody looked upon WDC as an enemy, and WDC chair was projected as the arch enemy of men, which was not correct. But anyway, I was projected like that. And the university men's opposition, insecurity, and informal formation of men's development cell. That is very ridiculous, very funny also, very amusing, that university on-campus men, they decided to form an association of university men. And that was called Men's Development Cell. I just could not believe when it happened, but it did happen. Their secret activities to counter WDC by excluding, isolating the WDC chair. Their activity was not to really counter the WDC, but to counter one individual. And as the sexual harassment cases increased in number, university men became more and more insecure. But university women had a sense of security in them. But they felt as if, you see, they were entitled to have their security without contributing anything. Gujarat University campus was divided into two camps, pro and anti WDC. And most of the campus women sat on the fence, non-committal. They would not really participate. Only the college and the executive committee of the WDC did all the work that we did. The result was that all the good outcome, all the positive outcome was being enjoyed by women at large. They got little justice, but WDC chair was made very, very lonely. I was absolutely lonely. But off campus, there was a lot of support. The Gandhians supported me. The colleges supported me. The local people supported me. And the press supported me. That was something really remarkable. The press was with me because right things were happening. And I was a representative of some good change, which was now coming. Next, please. Next, please. Yes. Okay. There were many cases which were registered, but because of the lack of time, I'll just talk about the most important. After many cases which were dealt by WDC as per the rules created by us and the policy, but finally a very high profile case came to us. And this was against the highest authority of the university, authorities of the university. This was a kind of the final showdown in my life. This was the final showdown for the women's development cell also, because this would be like a case which would decide the fate of women's development cell. That is what the press thought. The case was against the highest authority, two of them. And the women who went for this case were 9 administration women. And they wanted me to take the case outside the WDC, that is Women's Development Cell's office. I refused. That it could be taken only if they came to the office, which they were scared. They didn't want to come to the office. Finally, you see, they staged dharna just under the eye of the vice chancellor and the registrar in the university building itself. And I went to talk to them, negotiate, and I told them, you come to the WDC cottage and I take the case. Finally, they came, the case was registered, and it was like an atom bomb, an explosion, because men could never imagine that a mere woman could take such a case, because this was a very high profile case. And I had taken it. And I knew that no secretary can do my job. That is, if a secretary did it, maybe that when she is pressurized, she may just she may just say that she did not sign. So I had decided to invert that case myself. I took the responsibility. I got the conversation recorded, everything. And immediately, without consulting me, the VC or the university did not consult me. Right away on the 3rd, of course, it was in the very next day, it was in the press. You see, all the English and Gujarati papers were full of this case. And the VC blamed me and the other person blamed me. And finally, within 3 days' time, they held an EC meeting. EC is syndicate meeting. I was a member of syndicate that time. And I went to the meeting and found that it was almost like they had decided to call it a day, to have a battle, to fight it out completely. And I heard that men on the campus were saying, men on the campus unite, let's have a men's protected cell. Men's protected cell declared by the MCP on the campus. And they did not know the meaning of MCP. But this was my retort to the press. Next, you see, the university people, they decided men on the syndicate beware, and let's remove the cause of all the problem. And what was the cause? Women's Development Cell. And who was the main cause? The chair of Women's Development Cell. Had she not been so courageous, things would have not happened. So in my presence, they argued against me, they bullied me, and finally, when I did not give away the case, they wanted that I should give away the case. I did not. And finally, they said, all right, fine. We are disbanding Women's Development Cell. And as it is disbanded, naturally, WDC chairman, Women's Development chairman also is removed. She is no more the chairman. Against this, Against this letter, this document that the university sent me, we went to the High Court, Gujarat High Court. And the High Court dismissed whatever the university had done. Hearing was done, and university was found guilty of having done something wrong. They could not really supersede the Supreme Court. They could not supersede the UGC. They could not really decide whatever they were deciding. This was mandatory. WDC was mandatory. So, well, WDC was again there, and then the High Court reinstalled the WDC chair, that is me. I was reinstalled. But this, you see, going to the court and this period of running around, and this period of press, printing many things about WDC, finally, the result was, again, I was very lonely. When I returned after my victory, I found that I was very lonely on campus. Off campus, it was fine. Everything was fine. The press was with me, Gandhians with me, colleges with me, but the university and the campus, nobody talked to me except my department, and that too because I was heading the department. So they had to be on talking terms with me, but they were all scared. Next, please. Yes. And during this lonely times, I always thought of Andrew Rich, who had written a poem which says that it must be the loneliness of the one being awake first, of breathing dawn's first cold breath on the city in a house wrapped in sleep. I always felt that I don't have to really be sorry for whatever was happening. And I was lonely because I had awakened earlier compared to many. So I have to wait until it is dawn time. Once it is morning time, the sun rises and then things will be okay. So with this kind of hope, I continued. Now next, please. Hello. Yes. How much time is left? Hello. Okay. Hello.
Yes, ma'am. You can continue.
Maybe how much time? 5-10 minutes? 5 minutes?
Yeah, sure, ma'am. You can take that.
All right. I'll take 5 minutes and wind up. I'm skipping a few things.
Okay.
All right. You see, after this, once I was reinstalled, then there shouldn't have been any problem. But then the showdown at its climax was to happen now, you see. I was reinstalled. I performed my duty. That case, which was registered by the administration women, it was dealt with. But you see, it was hijacked by the Vice Chancellor and the Registrar and the EC. And by then, you see, my term got complete. So I could not do anything. That is, the case was incomplete when I left. But surely I went to the governor, the chancellor, and the chancellor, along with the EC of the Women's Development Cell, we wrote a reprimand to the authorities in university, and it was published in the newspaper. So that is how my tenure as WDC chair completed. And I thought now it would be fine. But the real climax came after that. The VC, after the NEC committee's visit, when the NEC committee complimented and wrote in their report that out of 6 outstanding departments, 3 were English, Rennie Canadian Center, and Women's Development Cell. So these 3 were being looked after by me. So in an interaction, I just told him that, sir, you see, we are doing so much and you don't acknowledge. In response, he says, yeah, you also did the WDC thing, right? And I'll see to it that your name is removed from the university diary. In another public meeting, he said the same thing again. And then I knew that I would not have a very comfortable life on campus. And immediately after that, in the year 2008 or 9, my EC tenure was getting over. That term was getting over. But I was still the Senate member, so I could fight the election and go to the EC again. And I was the only humanity professor. And the constituency was humanity professors. So obvious, I was the only one. But what they did in the election, they had a professor from science to fight against me. And I objected, went to the court. They did not listen. And finally, you see, the court was, you see, they misguided the court and told them that, all right, this was a matter of interpretation. So send it to the Secretary of Education. So it went to the Secretary of Education. and I had to wait for some time. Finally, the hearing was held by the Secretary of Education. He was an IS officer, and now he's a very big man in Delhi, Mr. Adia. Mr. Adia was the secretary that time, and he heard me. And before that, he had sent me the papers submitted by the university to him. I sent him the papers that I had submitted to the university. And you see, I read through and I prepared myself. I did not hire any lawyer this time. And you see, the charges were, first charge was that, well, the first thing that, all right, you see, the professor of statistics is also, you see, belonging to humanity, because statistics is taught there also, but that was not taken by the Secretary of Education. And the second argument was that, all right, fine, Ranjana Harish, the chair of WDC, defamed the university. As she has defamed the university, we wanted to set her right. So finally, you see, setting right a woman who speaks came up. And this was all right. And then they also said, the university said, that not only that she defamed the university, but she defied the EC. In the EC meeting that she attended, she defied the university. She was disobedient, and you see, she has to be, you see, her disobedience cannot be tolerated. And this amounts to insubordination. This was a kind of legal argument created by them. And the person sitting in the judge's chair, who was the Secretary of Education, Mr. Adia, he heard it quietly and he told me that you don't have to talk, I will talk. And he just said that this is not done. She has not defamed the university. She has served a cause. She has not disobeyed anybody. She cannot be held responsible for insubordination. And finally, I won. But this was a kind of unequal fight in which they had 3 lawyers, senior lawyers, to fight. And I decided not to have any lawyer, because earlier the lawyers could not help me. They did not understand. So this time I talked and finally I won. And after winning, next please, this time hoping against hope, I thought that this was going to be fine. Now people would settle and now I won't have any problem. But no, you see, there were problems. All through the tenure of that Vice Chancellor, I was almost like treated very, very shabbily. But I also told him that, you see, once we had an interaction and I told him, rather than telling in public that you are going to set me right, you please tell me, what have I done wrong except rendering my duty? You appoint, that is, university appointed me. I did my job. Now, what is wrong? Why do you want to punish me? And if you want to punish me, all right, let me tell you that I'm not going to really ask for anything for the years that remain. And all right, we'll be confirmed enemies without fighting. But in the year, and I wrote a letter to that effect to him, a personal letter. After that, he changed. And before his retirement in 2011, he threw a big party in honor of a conference that I was giving. It was a big surprise. It was a surprise to me as well, because you see, this money had come from Sahitya Akademi, Delhi. And he was not a party to anything. He was not involved in anything. Still, he said he appreciated the English department's work and he would like to throw a party in honor of women writers of India who were writing in English, and we had a party. So finally, we parted as good friends. The truth prevailed. I was lucky for being second generation academic doing gender. You see, I don't think that it was something very personal, that is something my achievement. It was rather the time factor. You see, had I been in Hilbrand's position, perhaps I would have been asked to resign. I was second generation. That is why, perhaps, you see, I got some justice. You see, the history teaches men and women, and people learn out of experience. So this was a very good, see, I was happy that finally in 2012, next please, when I retired, I had a happy retirement. I didn't have any problems. There were many men enemies, and still, you see, they could see through. That is, they could see that I was honest and I did not have any agenda of countering men or competing against men. And you see, the take home from my experience would be that being and doing gender was never easy and is never easy. It has been very difficult for all the women, all the academic women who did it. But because it is easy or because it is not easy, we cannot just leave it. We have to do it. We have to pursue rights. We have to pursue empowerment. And still women like Hilbrun have done it. And when we do it, I think we should realize that we have come a long way since Hilbrun. She had to resign. I did not have to resign. And many of my friends, they continued, all the academic friends, they continued. They had their own way of dealing with the things. And women must honestly script their untold stories for the younger generation's solidarity and faith. You see, writing, talking these stories is not for personal things, not for personal gains. It is very necessary for women, senior women, to share these experiences so that the younger generation learns. And you see, solidarity among women does not, it never means that, you see, women's movement will be against men. No, there is no animosity for women, men. You see, this should be always remembered. And I think I remembered it all through my life that, you see, I stood for the cause. I was fighting against an unjust action, but I was not fighting against a man, an individual. No. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah. And in my case, I realized that in addition to creating awareness and getting justice for women and serving whatever work so university has given me, I benefited because, you see, I realize, standing now at this point of time after my retirement, I realize that, you see, it has been a journey for me. It was a journey from the prescribed dotted I that I was given by the society, by the family. A woman, when she begins her journey, her I is prescribed by the society. And well, for me, what I have done is that I have self-defined my small I into a capital I. Now I know that a woman can do many things. And if one woman can do it, another woman also can do it. And finally, all together, we can have a better world. We can have justice for women. Next, please. Next, please. Yes. To conclude, I would conclude with Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks is a very important feminist. And she says that a genuine feminist politics always brings us from bondage to freedom, from lovelessness to loving, but there can be no love without justice. So this is what should be the goal, that the feminist politics or the feminist, the feminist politics should liberate us from bondage to freedom and to love, but not without justice. Justice is very, very important. And this kind of journey is a journey from dark to light, from tamasoma jyotirgamaya, from darkness to light, from pandemic, of course, in the present context, it is from pandemic to a healthy world. And with this, I'm sorry I took a longer time, but thank you so much. And I wish you a very happy Christmas. And thank you all for being here with us. And thanks to Anthony family and thanks to all those who are present here. Thank you.